one is going to be slightly more different, slightly more different affair, because I'm not going to be talking about any specific company. I'm going to be talking about the platform market and how it is, because this E3, in combination with the previous E3 and the way that all of the major companies are going at the moment, it has made the decisions of what platform to buy more complicated. First thing to say is that the PC market still is probably, I wouldn't want to say the best market, but it has remained the only one that is fully open, and by that I mean the hardware and software that goes into it are interchangeable, replaceable. You can pick and choose, but it also means that price ranges can vary from a couple of £100 for something that's very low in the graphic potential to several thousand. So you have the ability to buy a PC that is half the cost, a third of the only a part of the cost of a console, but you can also potentially get a PC that is about 2 or 3 times as expensive. You have more graphical output and you have more power over how you use it, but it is, if you're going for something like that, you're going to be for the most expensive. The thought patterns that I've always had around PCs is that if you're buying a new gaming PC specifically, go big, because you want to have the PC to last the maximum amount of time, and that requires going big. It's just get the best of the best that you can at the time. That will lead to the components lasting for the longest amount of time. That being, you have to replace them a lot less. We wouldn't have to get a new graphics card, a new processor, or anything like that. You wouldn't have to put out more money over the short term to basically update the PC. You are going to have to spend money to update the PC. I've gone through about 5 through my sort of gaming habits over the last 15 years. It's about 1 every 6 years. So the best thing to do is just go big, or go as big as you can, but that requires cash. So it's for all of the bollocks that goes around of the PC Master Race. It's like, yeah, it's also the most expensive, the most tech intensive, the most work intensive. It isn't a box you just buy. You have to tweak it and adapt it over time. That's always been the big problem with PCs. And when I'm talking about the consoles and things like that, it wouldn't necessarily be right to talk about PCs in pretty much in the same vein, because PCs specifically Windows and Linux PCs are an open platform. Everything else, including Mac PCs, are a closed platform. That being, you can't edit hardware, can't edit programming. So it's any version of the Xbox, any version of the PS, of the PlayStation, any version of anything from Nintendo, mobiles, tablets, Macs. You can't edit them at all, because that would void warranty and mean that if it breaks, it's your fault, and you have to pay for a replacement. Your fault. And so with that, I'm not really going to talk about PCs as sort of competition to consoles, because they are very much going. They have a very different market to it. So I'm not really going to be talking about PCs that much in comparison to consoles. PCs are still a market and they are still an open platform, but they're not really competing with consoles in the sense that a phone isn't competing with a tablet. They do both play games, but in a very different sense. To actually talk about the consoles, it's actually quite interesting now, because the Xbox One X is now officially announced. It's now not called the Scorpio. It is officially announced. Hardware has come out for it. People can start comparing the specs, comparing all of the doodly-doos, and the Switch has found its footing, and so it's become. But it's returned back to a 3-dog race, which has made things very interesting. But all of those 3 consoles do 3 different things, which makes the sort of the competition and the choices of the consumer a lot more interesting, because it comes down to personal choice and personal preference and what you would want from a console. The first console to really talk about should be the first of the new consoles out, the PlayStation 4 Pro. The Pro is quite interesting beast, because some of the news stories that's been coming out around E3. There was one that I found that was talking with one of the developers from Insomniac Games, who's doing the Spider-Man games, is saying that the 4K push isn't really the version isn't going to be 4K native. Which makes things very interesting. From what he said, it is going to be up-resed, so it's not going to be a native 4K, but it's going to be an up-resed 4K, and it's only going to be at 30 frames. So people are going to be poo-pooing that as much as possible, but the Sony isn't pushing 4K. It isn't pushing hardware. It has a lot of hardware, but it has a lot of hardware to basically go in with to get into the big boys club. Because the one thing that Sony is pushing is VR. It's pushing the PS VR as hard as possible. Hence the reason why probably a half to a third of the Sony conference was just advertising VR games. And one of the big pushes that came from outside of the conference was the PlayLink. Sony's PlayLink system, which is kind of like the Jackbox system. It's playing with it's a mobile device play system, and so it's pushing it's pushing that sort of angle, which is interesting. Part of the reason for that is that it's Sony still trying to push the interconnected hardware. It has the PS4 with the PSVR or the Sony phones or all that sort of stuff, all sort of working interconnected in its own sort of architecture, in its own sort of personal network. It's in the Sony network. This makes the PS4 Pro a very interesting beast, because it means it has enough power to get into the big boys club, but its main drive is for VR. It wants people to come into VR, and as a VR headset, it's fine. It already has the PlayStation Move set up, and then you have the PlayStation, like the Gun-Con controllers and things like that, all these different variants of controllers that are coming through with games like Farpoint and stuff. So it means that this push for VR is most certainly what Sony is going after. It makes... yeah, it's competing against PCs in that regard, in the sense of it's trying to compete against HTC and the Vive and the Oculus and other devices like that. It's trying to get into that area of competition and trying to open itself up to that area of game development rather than not, because the other two consoles don't do VR. The Switch simply doesn't have the power, and the Xbox doesn't have a headset device. So it's the one thing that Sony has that is a one-up against basically all of the other consoles. That is where sort of the core crux of the competition has come from now. It's being able to specialize and do one particular thing that the other two simply can't do. Because the one thing that the Xbox One X can do is native 4K at 60 frames. It's very much pushing the hardware. The Xbox One S, by comparison of hardware, is the strongest. It has the most powerfulest hardware, but as both the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X are going for different things, one going for VR, one going for native 4K at 60, they're very much trying to push different things. It requires different components. So sort of comparing them directly wouldn't necessarily be right, as they're aiming for two different outcomes. But if you're just looking at pure output, graphical output, then the Xbox One X is going to be the most powerfulest. And moving on towards Nintendo, the one thing that Nintendo has over both Microsoft with the Xbox and the PlayStation is being mobile. It has interactivity and mobility at its core, being able to essentially use it as a gaming tablet. But also in doing that, the Switch is also graphically the weakest, but also, because of that, cheapest. So, combining all of that together, it makes the sort of competition between the three of them very interesting, because two are very much pushing or trying to get onto the same ground as PCs, with Sony pushing for VR and with Microsoft trying to get to sort of the high graphical output, Nintendo is very much moving towards mobile gaming in the same way as mobile phones and tablets. It's very much moving towards that, but trying to have something high-end, but also something you can stick in the dock and play on your TV as well as a traditional console. And so in my mind, there isn't really a winner with the consoles. It mainly comes down to what you want from your gaming platform. If you want something that has high graphical power output, but something that isn't necessarily as user-intensive or financially intensive as a PC, then the Xbox One X is going to be that choice. If you want something that is going to be a fairly inexpensive way to get into VR, it's going to be the PlayStation 4 Pro. And if you just want to have a gaming device that you can take on those plane trips, take on those driving trips, something you can take over to your friend's house and play there when you need to, like I did, well, like many people did with the DS and the Game Boys of the past, or if you want to play something that's more graphically powerful than your phone, then it's going to be the Switch. It just comes down to what you want. All of the console manufacturers have moved into an area of specialization. That was the one problem the previous generation of consoles had, is Nintendo was trying to eke its way into being some sort of dual-screen mobile thing, but it didn't work. It just didn't have the technological power or output to do that. And both the PS3 and the 360 were just trying to be PCs. Even with the original Xbox One and the original PS4, they were still just trying to be PCs. But now, with this new generation of consoles, they have become specialized. And that is what the consoles needed. They wanted to have a specialization. We are now back to the times of having those debates around, do you want a Nintendo or do you want a Sega? Do you want something that's cheap and user-friendly or want something that's got the punch? But the thing that has made things slightly more complicated is people like Atari have come out and said they're making a console. That shocked the hell out of me. That was one of the news stories that was very surprising out of everything that came around, because they didn't have an official release or anything like that. I haven't really found anything. It's basically they just confirmed that they're making a console of some kind. No specifics on how or what the console was going to be doing. All they know is Atari is now making another console. One of the granddaddies of the fucking console industry is now coming back to make something. At this point, bugger knows. But it's... the console market hasn't been this strong for quite some time, and it also means that some companies are doing very big gambles. But yeah, it seems like each of the console manufacturers has found their area, found their specialization, and yeah, it's coming down to the choices you want and the choices that you're going to get. If you're not interested in any of those things, if you're not interested in mobility or graphical output or VR, probably getting a cheap PC, £400 PC thing, £400 pre-build, is probably going to be something to do. It's probably going to be a way to go, or just getting a normal PS4 or a normal Xbox One. The games are still going to be backwards compatible, just not as powerful, not as graphically intensive. Even Xbox was saying they're going to be patching the buggery out of anything that goes towards the Xbox One to make it look as fancy as possible. Because they have to give reason to having a shit ton of hardware in the damn thing. So that's really basically it regarding the consoles. Yeah, if people have more questions or want to ask for my thoughts over other things as well regarding these consoles and regarding the sort of competition between the consoles as well, I might do another one as well if people are interested, because it's getting to a point where, yeah, the console market, like I said, the console market hasn't been this strong for quite some time, because there is actual bloody competition in the damn thing now, rather than everything trying to be a mutated version of a bleeding PC.